Sitting across from my mother at our annual Thanksgiving dinner, I watched her beam with pride as she announced my brother Jackson had just bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. Then came the familiar sting. When will you finally settle down, Tessa? My carefully crafted life suddenly felt invisible. I took a deep breath, smiled, and dropped my truth bomb. Oh, I already did. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. Before you hear what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button. I never planned to create waves at Thanksgiving dinner. As a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur living in Chicago, I had grown accustomed to the subtle and not-so-subtle disapproval from my family about my life choices. While my brother Jackson followed what my parents considered the right path with college, a corporate job marriage to Stephanie, and now, apparently a house in the suburbs, I had carved out my own route. My company, Horizon Digital Solutions, had just secured a major client that would double our revenue next year. My downtown loft apartment overlooked the city skyline. I had meaningful relationships and a community that supported me. But somehow none of that seemed to register on my family's scale of success. The week before Thanksgiving, I almost canceled. Scrolling through my calendar while sipping my morning coffee, I seriously contemplated making up an emergency work situation. The memories of previous gatherings loomed large in my mind. Last Christmas, my mother Margaret had spent 20 minutes discussing my cousin Laura's wedding plans before turning to me with a pitying expression and saying, "Maybe next year will be your turn, Tessa." The previous Thanksgiving, she had introduced me to a distant family friend's son despite knowing I was focusing on my business. "You should absolutely go." My best friend Amanda insisted during our phone call that evening. I had met Amanda during a business conference 5 years ago, and she understood my family dynamics all too well. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Your business is thriving. Your life is fulfilling. Maybe this is the year they finally see that. Or maybe this is the year I finally stop needing them to see it," I replied, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Even better," Amanda said. "Either way, I want all the details when you get back." With renewed determination, I packed my bag for the 3-day trip to Mapleton, the small town 2 hours outside Chicago where I had grown up. As I loaded my suitcase into my car, I felt a strange mix of dread and resolution. This year would be different, not because my family would change, but because I had. The drive to Mapleton was like traveling back in time. The highway gradually gave way to county roads lined with bare November trees. I passed the high school where I had been valedictorian, a fact my mother mentioned far less than Jackson making the football team. The town square looked festive with early Christmas decorations, though the Black Friday sale signs already hung in most windows. I stopped at Vincenzo's, the local wine shop that had somehow survived the invasion of chain stores. Mr. Vincenzo himself still worked behind the counter, his hair now completely gray. "Tessa Carroll. Home for the holidays," he greeted me warmly. "How is the big city treating you?" "Very well." I smiled, selecting a $150 bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. His eyebrows raised slightly at my choice. 5 years ago, I would have opted for something much cheaper. "Business must be good," he commented carefully, wrapping the bottle. "It is," I replied, feeling a small thrill of satisfaction. "Very good, actually." If only my family would show the same recognition. The Carroll family home sat on Maple Street, a 2-story colonial with white trim and black shutters that my parents had purchased 30 years ago. My father Thomas had spent decades perfecting the lawn, which now lay dormant under a thin layer of fallen leaves. The driveway already held several cars, indicating I was one of the last to arrive. My father opened the door before I could knock, his familiar smile creasing his face. At 62, his hair had thinned and grayed, but his eyes still held the same kindness they always had. "There she is," he said, wrapping me in a bear hug that smelled of aftershave and the cinnamon rolls he made every Thanksgiving morning. Dad had always been quietly supportive of my choices, though he rarely contradicted my mother openly. "Hi, Dad," I said, returning his embrace. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Tessa," finally my mother called from the hallway. At 60, Margaret Carroll remained an imposing figure. Her blonde hair perfectly colored and styled, her holiday outfit coordinated with seasonal jewelry. "Everyone else has been here for hours. Your hair looks different. Did you cut it again?" Before I could answer, she had turned toward the kitchen, expecting me to follow. Typical. My recently highlighted brown hair that I had spent $200 on at a top Chicago salon was dismissed in a single sentence. The house buzzed with activity. My Aunt Patricia and Uncle Bill had come from Minnesota with their 2 teenage children. My mother's sister, Susan, and her husband, Mark, were there with their daughter, Laura, and her fiancé, Daniel. And of course, Jackson, Stephanie, and their 2 children, Emma and Noah, aged 8 and 6. Aunt Tessa Emma rushed toward me, wrapping her arms around my waist. Despite everything, I adored my niece and nephew. They were untouched by the family dynamics that complicated adult relationships. "Hey, kiddo," I said, hugging her back. "You grew about a foot since I saw you last." 3.5 inches, she corrected me seriously. Mom measured on my growth chart. Jackson approached with Noah trailing behind him. My brother looked good on the surface, his 6-foot frame still fit his smile camera ready. But I noticed the new lines around his eyes, the slight slump in his shoulders that hadn't been there at our 4th of July gathering. "Sis," he said, giving me a quick side hug. "Glad you could fit us into your busy schedule." There it was, the first dig. I chose to ignore it. "Good to see you too," I replied. "How are things at Midwest Financial?" Jackson had worked at the same investment firm since graduating college. "Busy. End of year is always crazy." He lowered his voice slightly. "But I have some big news. Mom probably wants to announce it during dinner, though." His expression suggested I should be impressed, and I nodded as if I was. Stephanie appeared in a perfectly pressed holiday sweater, looking exhausted beneath her makeup. "Tessa, hi," she said, hugging me briefly. "Could you help in the kitchen? Your mother is trying to do everything herself as usual." As I followed Stephanie, Aunt Susan pulled me aside briefly. Unlike my mother, Susan had chosen a career over early marriage, becoming a professor, before eventually marrying in her late 30s. "You look wonderful, Tessa," she said quietly. "That confidence suits you. I want to hear all about your business later." That brief moment of validation gave me hope that this Thanksgiving might actually be different. But hope, as I would soon be reminded, was a dangerous thing in the Carroll household. The kitchen had always been my mother's domain, a place where her authority was absolute. The counters were covered with dishes in various stages of preparation, the air rich with savory scents. My mother stood at the center of it all, directing operations like a general. "Tessa, you can mash the potatoes," she instructed, barely looking up as I entered. "Remember to warm the milk first. Last year they were lumpy." Last year they had not been lumpy. They had been perfectly creamy with roasted garlic and chives. But Margaret Carroll's selective memory rewrote history to fit her narrative. "Sure, Mom," I said, reaching for the pot of boiled potatoes. My mind flashed back to childhood cooking lessons in this same kitchen. Not like that Tessa, my mother would say, taking over whatever task I had been assigned. Meanwhile, she would praise Jackson for the simplest contributions. "Look how evenly Jackson stirred the gravy. You have such a good technique, honey." Now I watched as my mother inspected the sweet potato casserole Stephanie had brought. "This looks lovely, Stephanie. You always make it just how Jackson likes it." Moments later, when I added a touch more cream to the mashed potatoes, "Tessa, those will be too rich. Not everyone wants to drown in butter." I gripped the potato masher tighter, focusing on creating the silkiest, most perfect mashed potatoes this kitchen had ever seen. Small victories. Reaching for the pepper mill, my elbow knocked against a measuring cup of turkey broth, sending it spilling across the counter. Before I could grab a towel, my mother sighed dramatically. "This is why I asked you to be careful, Tessa. Now we will have to make more broth for the gravy." The criticism was disproportionate to the minor accident, but entirely predictable. I caught Stephanie giving me a sympathetic glance as she wiped up the spill without comment. In the living room, the men had settled into their traditional pre-dinner rituals. Football played on the television while they discussed playoff chances, politics, and the stock market. When I entered during a brief kitchen break, the conversation about President Biden's economic policies came to an awkward halt. "We do not need to stop talking just because Tessa is here," Uncle Bill said with a laugh that suggested the opposite. "Actually, economic policy affects my business directly," I said, sitting down in an available armchair. "The new small business tax credits are making a significant difference for companies like mine." My father looked interested, but Uncle Mark quickly steered the conversation back to football statistics. My input, as usual, dissolved into the air unacknowledged. Aunt Patricia cornered me near the appetizer table. Her voice lowered conspiratorially. So, no special someone this Thanksgiving. A successful woman like you must have admirers. I date, I said, simply popping a stuffed mushroom into my mouth to avoid elaborating. Well, do not wait too long, she advised, as if imparting great wisdom. The good ones get snatched up quickly. Look at Laura and Daniel, getting married next spring, and they already have their 5-year plan all mapped out. From across the room, Uncle Bill boomed, Tessa Jackson tells us your internet business is still going. Good for you sticking with it. Though nothing beats the security of a traditional career, especially in this economy. My internet business, as he called it, had 30 employees and was projecting $8 million in revenue next year. But I simply smiled and nodded, saving my energy for battles worth fighting. As I returned to the kitchen, I overheard Jackson and Stephanie in the guest bathroom, their voices carrying through the partially open door. We cannot keep doing this. Stephanie whispered urgently. The mortgage is already stretching us thin, and now with the property taxes and the new furniture you insisted on. It will be fine, Jackson replied, his voice tense. The year-end bonus will cover it. And if it does not, your parents already helped with the down payment. We cannot keep pretending everything is perfect when we are drowning. Keep your voice down, Jackson hissed. Not here. Not today. I quietly moved past processing this new information. The perfect suburban life my brother projected, the one my parents held up as the gold standard, was built on financial quicksand. The revelation did not bring me joy, only a complicated mix of sympathy and vindication. During appetizers, I discovered more cracks in the facade through casual conversation. Jackson's new position came with longer hours but proportionally less pay. Stephanie's part-time return to teaching was less about career fulfillment, as she had claimed in family emails, and more about financial necessity. The beautiful house in the suburbs, with its 4 bedrooms and finished basement, had stretched their finances dangerously thin. As everyone moved toward the dining room, I felt the familiar internal conflict rise within me. Stay quiet and keep the peace, or speak my truth and risk discord. My therapist. Drew's words echoed in my mind from our session last week. Your silence protects a harmful dynamic. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a relationship is to be honestly yourself, even when that truth creates temporary discomfort. I slipped into the guest bathroom and quickly texted my business partner, Jordan. Major client signed the contract. The response came immediately. Yes. Champagne when you get back. 2-year deal, full package. We are officially playing with the big leagues now. I stared at myself in the mirror, this successful woman my family refused to see. Not today, I promised my reflection. Today they see the real me, whether they like it or not. The dining room table had been arranged with obvious care and equally obvious hierarchy. Jackson and Stephanie sat near the head where my father would carve the turkey. The engaged couple, Laura and Daniel, had places of honor as well. I found my name card near the end, between my teenage cousins, and the corner physically positioning me as an afterthought. I briefly considered switching the cards, but decided against such a petty move. The physical arrangement merely reflected the emotional reality I had known for years. Today, that would change. The Thanksgiving toast had always been my father's territory. Thomas Carroll stood at the head of the table, crystal glass raised, his expression warm as he surveyed his family. Another year of blessings, he began, his voice carrying the slight tremble that had developed in recent years. Margaret and I are so thankful to have our family gathered around this table. Family is what matters most in this world, the foundation upon which everything else is built. I caught his eye briefly, and he offered a small smile that felt like an acknowledgement, however slight. Uncle Bill spoke next without invitation. I would like to add something, he announced, raising his glass. To achievements and milestones. Especially to Jackson and Stephanie, who are showing us all how it is done. Great career, beautiful family, and now a wonderful new home. You two are living the American dream. Glasses raised around the table with murmurs of agreement. I lifted mine as well, watching Jackson's expression carefully. He smiled broadly, but it did not reach his eyes. Actually, I said, seizing a brief pause, I would like to toast to new beginnings and following your own path, whatever that might be. To authentic living. I had barely finished when my mother interjected, yes, yes, to family. Now, who would like dark meat? My contribution dismissed so quickly it barely existed. I felt a familiar ache, the childhood feeling of invisibility washing over me. But now at 32, it triggered determination rather than despair. The meal progressed with compliments to the chef and passing of sides. Conversation flowed around me as I focused on my plate waiting. I knew what was coming. My mother had orchestrated this moment since we sat down, possibly since Jackson had called with his news. "We have something special to celebrate today," she announced during a lull between main course and dessert. "Jackson and Stephanie have some wonderful news." All eyes turned to my brother, who straightened slightly, the perfect son ready for his moment of glory. "As some of you already know," he said, reaching for Stephanie's hand, "we have just purchased our first home." "Not just any home," my mother interjected, unable to contain herself. "A gorgeous colonial in Oakwood Estates. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and the most beautiful bay windows in the dining room. Over 2,500 square feet on a half-acre lot. The schools are excellent," Stephanie added, her smile looking slightly strained. "And there is a community pool for summer. It is exactly what a growing family needs," my mother continued. "Room to expand, entertain, put down real roots." The unspoken comparison hung in the air between us. My downtown loft, perfect for my lifestyle, was in my mother's eyes a temporary stopping place, not a real home. "Tessa has a beautiful apartment in the city," my father added, surprising me with his defense. "An apartment is nice for now," my mother replied, her tone making now sound like a regrettable but temporary condition. "But eventually, everyone wants a real home somewhere permanent. Which reminds me." She turned her attention fully to me, her expression a familiar mix of concern and judgment. "When will you finally settle down, Tessa?" The question landed exactly as intended, with the full weight of family expectation behind it. The table quieted, silverware pausing mid-air, all eyes shifting between my mother and me. This was the moment she had been building toward, the public interrogation designed to highlight the perceived deficiencies in my life choices. In previous years, I might have deflected with humor or changed the subject. I might have offered a vague reassurance about someday or when the time is right. I might have absorbed the implied criticism to keep the peace. Not today. Something shifted inside me, a tectonic plate of self-perception moving into proper alignment. I felt suddenly completely calm. The noise of insecurity that had buzzed in my ears at family gatherings fell silent. I saw with perfect clarity what this moment required. I set down my fork, deliberately met my mother's expectant gaze, and smiled. Not the apologetic smile of past holidays, but the confident smile I wore in board meetings and client presentations. "Oh, I already did," I said, my voice clear and unwavering. "I just did not invite anyone who doubts me." The words hung in the air like crystal, sharp and sparkling with truth. My mother's face flushed red, her mouth opening slightly with shock. Around the table, heads turned, expressions ranging from stunned to secretly delighted. "I beg your pardon," my mother finally managed, her hand fluttering to her necklace. "I said I have settled down," I repeated, maintaining the same calm tone. "Just not in the way you expected me to." Uncle Bill cleared his throat uncomfortably. Aunt Susan tried unsuccessfully to hide a smile behind her napkin. My father looked at me with something that might have been pride. "Well, I hardly think a rental apartment and a startup business counts as." My mother began rallying her defenses. "I do not rent, Mom. I own my loft outright. Purchased last year. 2,000 square feet in the West Loop, with a rooftop garden and views of the lake. And Horizon Digital is not a startup anymore. We have 30 employees, major corporate clients, and we just signed our biggest contract yet. 2-year deal worth more than most people make in 5 years." Jackson looked at me with undisguised surprise and something else. Relief, perhaps, that the spotlight had shifted. "Why did you not tell us any of this?" my mother demanded, her tone suggesting I had deliberately withheld information rather than been denied the opportunity to share it. "I have tried, Mom. Every family gathering, every phone call. But somehow my news never quite seems to register as important." The truth of this statement settled over the table like a fine dust impossible to brush away. Even my mother, master of deflection and selective hearing, could not deny it in this moment. "Well," she said finally, "that is nice. But I meant settling down personally. Family is what really matters, Tessa. At the end of the day, career success can only take you so far. I expected this pivot, this moving of goalposts. But this time I was ready. I have family, Mom. Not traditional, perhaps, but genuine. Friends who celebrate my victories and support me through challenges. Colleagues who have become like siblings. Mentors who guide me. A community that accepts me exactly as I am. As I spoke, I watched something remarkable happen. Various family members around the table began to nod slightly. Aunt Susan openly. My father more subtly. Even Laura, deep in traditional wedding planning, seemed to be considering my words with new understanding. And as for romantic settling down, I continued deciding to address this final criterion: I date when I meet someone interesting. I have meaningful relationships. But I will not rush into marriage just to tick a box on someone else's life checklist. Nobody is suggesting that, my mother said quickly, though we both knew that was exactly what she had been suggesting for years. Jackson surprised me by speaking up. Tessa is right, Mom. All eyes turned to him. There is more than one way to build a successful life. My brother met my gaze across the table, and I saw something unexpected there. Not competition or judgment, but a flash of envy. The house, he said quietly. It is more than we can really afford right now. The down payment wiped out our savings, and the mortgage payments are crushing us. We did it because it seemed like the next expected step, but honestly, I am not sure it was the right decision. Stephanie's eyes widened at this public confession. Then her shoulders relaxed as if relieved by the honesty. My mother looked stricken. But you seemed so excited. You said it was perfect. We wanted to make you proud, Stephanie said simply. The perfection narrative my mother had constructed began visibly crumbling, and with it the entire foundation of our family dynamic. The successful son following the approved life path was admitting to financial strain and regret. The disappointing daughter had built a thriving business and stable life on her own terms. In that moment, reality reasserted itself over the fiction we had all been maintaining for years. The remainder of the Thanksgiving meal unfolded in a way I could never have predicted. After the initial shock, conversation gradually resumed, but with a different quality. Questions directed at me became genuine rather than performative. What exactly did my company do? How had I managed the challenges of scaling a business? What was my neighborhood like? Your business model sounds fascinating, Uncle Mark commented, sounding genuinely interested for the first time. The digital marketing landscape is changing so rapidly. I wish I had pursued my interest in graphic design, Aunt Patricia admitted, surprising everyone, including herself. I always assumed the traditional path was the only secure option. My teenage cousins asked intelligent questions about tech careers. Even Laura and Daniel wanted advice about budgeting for their honeymoon, acknowledging my financial acumen after years of dismissing my business sense. Jackson and I had a moment alone when helping to clear the table between dessert and coffee. I meant what I said, he told me, loading plates into the dishwasher. I admire what you have built, Tessa. For years I thought you were being stubborn, refusing to grow up. Now I realize you just had the courage to define success on your own terms. Your path is valid too, Jack, I said, meaning it. You have a beautiful family. That is real success by any measure. The difference is you chose your path deliberately. I followed expectations without questioning them. Now we are in a house we cannot afford working hours that keep me from actually enjoying the family that was supposedly the reason for it all. It is not too late to make changes, I suggested. Maybe not. He agreed, a thoughtfulness in his expression I had rarely seen. The most surprising conversation happened in the kitchen after dinner, when most of the family had moved to the living room for football and post-meal naps. I was wrapping leftovers when my mother joined me, picking up a dish towel to dry the serving platters I had washed. For several minutes we worked in silence. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than usual. I worry about you. That is all it has ever been. I waited, giving her space to continue. When you chose such an uncertain path, I feared you would end up lonely and struggling. I pushed the traditional route because it seemed safest. It worked for me, for our generation. I know, Mom, I said, keeping my tone gentle. But different things make different people happy. Security for me comes from being self-sufficient, building something of my own. She nodded slowly. Your father always said you knew your own mind even as a little girl. I should have listened to him more. She placed a dried platter in the cabinet. I would like to see this loft of yours sometime. And your company. "I would like that," I replied, surprised at the sincerity in my voice. "Chicago is beautiful during the Christmas season. You and Dad could come for a weekend." "Perhaps we will," she said. Not a definite yes, but the most open she had been to entering my world, rather than insisting I conform to hers. The next morning, over breakfast, the shift in dynamics continued to unfold. My mother asked about my upcoming business trips, making notes of the dates, as if they actually mattered to her. My father talked about visiting Chicago, his eyes lighting up at the prospect of exploring the city beyond our usual family dinner spots. "You should take them to that rooftop restaurant you mentioned," Stephanie suggested, no longer performing the role of perfect daughter-in-law, but engaging as her authentic self. As I packed my car to return to Chicago, I felt lighter than I had in years after a family gathering. The complicated emotions remained. Decades of patterns would not dissolve overnight, but something fundamental had changed when I finally stood firmly in my truth. The drive back to the city gave me time to process. The bare trees and harvested fields gradually gave way to suburbs. Then the magnificent skyline of Chicago appeared on the horizon. My skyline. My chosen home. I called Amanda from the car using the hands-free system. "So, how was the battlefield this year?" she asked immediately. "Different," I replied, finding myself smiling. I finally said what needed to be said. "Oh my God," details immediately. I recounted the confrontation, the shocked faces, the unexpected allies who emerged. "I am so proud of you," Amanda said when I finished. "This is what we have been talking about in therapy for years. Standing in your truth even when it creates waves." The strange thing is, I reflected, once I stopped needing their validation, some of them actually began to see me. "That is usually how it works," she said wisely. "Self-acceptance precedes external acceptance." Pulling into my parking garage beneath my building, I felt the tangible evidence of the life I had built. The security guard greeted me by name. The elevator required my personal keycard for the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into my loft with its floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the city lights now twinkling in the early evening. This was settling down. This was success. This was home. 2 days later, I hosted a small dinner party for my closest friends, my chosen family who had supported me through every step of building my life and business. We celebrated the new contract with champagne on my rooftop deck, bundled in blankets against the November chill. The city spread out below us like a carpet of stars. To Tessa, Jordan toasted, raising his glass, who built an empire while her family was still asking when she would get a real job. Everyone laughed, but I found myself offering a more nuanced perspective, actually to understanding that success looks different for everyone, and to the courage to define it for yourself, even when that definition contradicts expectations. Later that evening, alone in my beautiful space, I reflected on the deeper transformation that had occurred at that Thanksgiving table. For years, I had been seeking external validation, permission to live my life authentically. What I discovered was that the permission had always been mine to give. My worth had never depended on family recognition. My choices were valid whether they were understood or not. The real breakthrough wasn't changing their perception, but releasing my attachment to it. That liberation, that wholeness, was the true settling down. Building a life that resonates with your authentic self, surrounding yourself with people who celebrate rather than merely tolerate you, creating success on your own terms rather than chasing someone else's definition. Have you ever had to stand up for your own version of success against family expectations? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional path is valid too. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that the most important approval will always be your own.